Last week we met a licensed reptile collector from Western Australia and road tested the uniquely Australian black-headed and Woma python. This week we'll be travelling to various parts of Central Australia and the East Coast to meet the bearded dragon family and discover a little bit about their natural history and suitability as pets. Because it occurs across the heavily populated east coast of Australia, the eastern or coastal bearded dragon is probably the one that is most familiar to Australians. I'm here in a small fragment of habitat about 40 minutes drive west of Sydney, still on the Cumberland Plain. And it might surprise you to know that even though this is only a small fragment of habitat, it does support a healthy population of eastern bearded dragons. Now, I've been here for about 10 minutes wandering around, and I've already seen 2 adults and a couple of babies. Eastern bearded dragons like to gain a bit of height. This allows them to perch somewhere where they have a good view of their territory and they can keep an eye out for food, rival males and predators. And of course, this peculiar quirk of their nature allows people to find them quite easily. I've just come across this guy on the ground, looks like an adult male, and I'm only a couple of feet away, and it's remaining completely motionless even though I'm easily within striking distance if I was a predator. It's so convinced in its ability to remain invisible through its cryptic coloration that it will stay completely still and not react unless I actually reach out and touch it. Now, I'm going to see what happens if I actually touch it. Now it's puffing up, it's puffing out its throat, and it's showing me why it's been given the name bearded dragon, because this is their threat display. One of the characteristics of a male is a black beard, and you can see that this guy has got a black beard. An interesting thing that distinguishes the eastern bearded dragon from the inland bearded dragon, the coastal bearded dragon has a squarish beard as compared to the more rounded beard of the inland bearded dragon, and the row of spines along the back of the head are actually in a V shape, an arc of spines, whereas in the inland bearded dragon, this row of spines is arranged in a straight line across the back of the head. It's also got a much smaller head, relatively speaking. This is pretty much maximum size for a coastal bearded dragon, whereas male inland bearded dragons I've seen at least twice this size. So what I'm going to do now is put this guy back on a tree and let him run up and get on with his life. The stronghold of the eastern bearded dragon is in the woodlands and dry sclerophyll forests of the east coast, such as this habitat in midwestern New South Wales. In the wild, as in captivity, female eastern bearded dragons will be ready to lay around October each year. A tub filled with about 6 to 8 inches of damp sand will encourage captive females to lay their eggs. After digging a shallow depression, the female will reverse into the hole and begin laying. The process takes about 15 minutes, during which approximately 12 to 18 eggs will be laid. Fertile eggs will be plump and white and have an embryo clearly visible as a dark patch on one.
The cells have been popular for at least the last 10 years. I've been breeding them for approximately 21 years. I think 1982 we got our first stock from Ron Trimper, and they originated in Europe. We brought those in. We bred them for a good 10 years before we ever got any that had any color on them. The original ones came in were gray morphs. They had a little bit of orange around the eyes, maybe a little bit of orange around the lips, and that's what everyone thought that a bearded dragon was a big gray lizard, and they had a lot of appeal, even just the normal gray ones. They make great pets. These animals have been really free-range raised outdoors. We bring them to the shows, and they sit here. They should be very wild. If they're another type of lizard, they would be off over the fence by now, you know.
Over the last 25 years, the central bearded dragon has found its way into homes right across the globe. Its adaptability and friendly nature have helped it become the world's most popular pet lizard. American keepers have produced a variety of colours that never fail to draw interest at the many reptile expos and shows held there each year. They are popular with beginners, for which they make an ideal first reptile pet. Due to government regulation, Australian keepers have been slow to develop the potential of this lizard. But because all bearded dragons originate in Australia, we have a greater variety of wild bloodlines to work with, and some attractive colour variations have begun to emerge. A trip to observe central bearded dragons in the wild will increase one's admiration for these hardy lizards. The heat of the Australian outback seems hostile to life, but they have conquered this environment to persist even through the driest times, along with the ubiquitous zebrafinch, budgerigar and echidna. As with other species in the family, the central bearded dragon will have an object within its home range that allows it to get some height above ground level. It may only be a small rock or termite mound, or it may be a dead tree, such as these, which are all homes to wild specimens. A good vantage point allows it to keep an eye out for food, predators, potential mates and rivals, and it pays to keep this in mind when setting up an enclosure for your pet. Female central bearded dragons will be gravid in October and can be encouraged to lay by giving them access to a tub filled with damp sand. An average of 25 eggs will be laid, and after 2 months of incubation at 30 degrees Celsius, they will begin to hatch. Hatchlings can be started on live crickets, and as they grow can be weaned onto vegetable matter and pelletized food. Frozen crickets will also be taken, and this eliminates the need to keep or buy any live food. Quite convenient. A recent and useful development is the vibrating food dish. This makes it possible to trick your dragons into eating frozen crickets, and as you can see, it is very effective. The flat, almost featureless, cracking clay soils of central Queensland are home to the pygmy or black soil dragon, the smallest of the 3 species we'll be covering this week. These dragons have evolved on a landscape where opportunities for perching are few and may be restricted to a mound of earth or a small rock. Pygmy dragons adapt well to captivity and, like the central bearded dragon, can be conditioned to take frozen crickets, although these will never be eaten with the same gusto as live ones. As with the other 2 species, female pygmies will be gravid in October and can be given a tub filled with damp sand in which to lay. About 15 to 20 eggs is average, and as you would expect, these are considerably smaller than central and eastern bearded dragon eggs. And now it's time to set up the eggs for incubation. The recommended incubation medium is vermiculite, which is available from most hardware or gardening stores. It's a fairly simple process, and now I'm going to take you through it step by step. The things we'll need to set it up are some vermiculite, Chinese takeaway container, the 1 litre size, and a lid, a Ziploc bag, some cling wrap, a glass of water, a wooden kebab skewer, and lastly, a good set of digital scales. So the first thing we do is we weigh the Chinese takeaway container, and this one weighs 20 grams. Then we add the vermiculite until it fills the container to about 2/3, which is probably about that much. Give it a bit of a shake, settle it down, and we weigh that. Now that's 100 grams, which means that we have 80 grams of vermiculite if you subtract the 20 grams that is the container. So now we need 80 grams of water, and this is where the Ziploc bag becomes useful. We add some water to the Ziploc bag, trying not to spill it anywhere. This is just a very convenient way of containing the water while you're weighing it. So then we pop that on the scales, and it's exactly 80 grams, which was a very good guess. Now what we do is we just make a small hole in the side of the Ziploc bag, which you just do by pulling the corner off with your fingernail, like I've just done. Then evenly spread the water over the vermiculite, like that. Now we're ready to put the eggs in the container. So now we've transferred the eggs to the Chinese takeaway container, we're ready to finalize the process. And I've found a pair of scissors which I'll use shortly. What we do is we spread the cling wrap over the top of the container. Then we use the Chinese takeaway container lid to hold it in place. Then we take the scissors and make sure you get a sharp pair of scissors. Trim the Glad wrap around the edge of the container just to neaten it up a little bit so it doesn't get caught on things in the incubator. And now the last thing we do is we just make a couple of tiny little air holes using the wooden kebab skewer. Just 3 is enough. And now it's time for the final step. Place them in the incubator and then practice your patience. During this time the eggs will swell considerably as they absorb water from the vermiculite. All going well, in 2 months they should hatch. You will know when they are about to hatch as they will begin to lose moisture, seen as water droplets gathering on the surface of the egg. After slitting the egg with their egg tooth, the baby dragons will remain in the egg for up to a day. During this time they should not be disturbed as they are absorbing the last of their yolk. As with all hatchling dragons, baby pygmies have an attitude and may open their mouths and gape or even bite if picked up. This is normal behaviour and quite justified since they are expecting to be eaten by anything bigger than themselves. Waiting for eggs to hatch can be frustrating and requires patience. But it all seems worth it when those little heads begin to pop out and reveal tiny replicas of the parents. Occasionally, something entirely unexpected pops out of an egg, and that can be like winning the reptile lottery. This is one such example. It was produced by normal-looking parents and came from a clutch of normal-looking siblings. But its difference lies in a random mutation which has reduced the amount of melanin or dark pigment in its skin. This is called hypomelanism and is obvious when compared to a normal-looking pygmy dragon. Not only is a specimen like this potentially worth a lot of money, but it also opens up the possibility of exciting new designer morphs. This is essentially the process that has driven the reptile keeping hobby forward over the last 20 years. Like any reptile, bearded dragons will shed their skin every few months. The skin comes off in pieces and is generally no cause for concern. However, sometimes shedding skin can become too dry, and then a little help from the owner may be needed. This is a delicate process and should only be done by an experienced keeper. This is the hypomelanistic dragon we saw earlier, and its new skin is a dazzling white. It is important to make sure you get all the skin off the toes, or the old skin may harden, restrict blood flow to the toes, and eventually they will drop off. Under natural conditions, this probably never happens. Along with crickets and wood roaches, superworms make a tasty snack for your dragons. This family of pygmies are lined up in expectation of their wormy treat. Superworms should not be confused with mealworms, which are less nutritious, more fatty, and cannot be fed as frequently. Culturing your own superworms is easy if you have a warm place to keep them. First, obtain some adult worms from a supplier. These can then be encouraged to pupate by isolating them in individual containers and placing them in a dark place. They should curl up and pupate within 2 weeks. Pupa should then be placed in a container with unprocessed raw bran. Once they turn into beetles, they will need moisture. The easiest solution is to add halved apples or oranges to the container. Within a month, you should see the tiny superworms beginning to appear. Replace the fruit and bran when you notice they have been eaten. Your superworms will reach maturity at about 4 or 5 months of age, but can be fed off at any size. And now we've dealt with some aspects of feeding, let's move on to enclosures. The easiest solution to providing a home for your bearded dragon is to buy a ready-made cage. These days, most decent pet stores stock reptile products, and some even specialize in them. It's in everyone's best interest to make sure that your pet gets the proper care, so never be afraid to ask for advice. For a baby bearded dragon, a 2-foot cage is adequate. You will also need a substrate such as sand, 2 lights, one to provide ultraviolet and one to provide heat. A water bowl and a food bowl are also very handy. Once you have decided where to place your cage, preferably near a power point, you can begin to set it up. Some nice printed backdrops are available, and if you choose to use one of these, it should be attached first. Then add the substrate. A fine desert sand looks attractive and will not cause problems if your dragon accidentally eats some. Then add your synthetic rock feature, plastic plants, and a basking perch. Lastly, install the light bulbs and make sure they're working. Set the thermostat to 30 degrees Celsius, then you are ready to add your dragon. The key to keeping your bearded dragon happy, or any reptile for that matter, is to never forget that it needs an external heat source. However, it also needs a place to escape the heat. If your cage provides a temperature gradient between 20 and 30 degrees, your pet can decide where it wants to be. A happy bearded dragon will make a responsive and curious pet. It will enjoy interacting with you, but it will be just as happy to be left alone when you don't have the time. It will not bite or scratch, and doesn't have feathers or hairs to give you allergies. It is in fact the perfect reptile pet. The road test results for this episode produce the following scores. For the eastern or coastal bearded dragon, at $50 to $100, this is a very affordable pet, so on price I gave it a score of 9. Eastern bearded dragons are not as commonly kept as centrals and pygmies, and therefore not as readily available, a score of 6 for availability. Maintenance. Eastern beardies are relatively simple to maintain, but in the long term they do not seem to thrive. They can be highly strung, sometimes lose weight for no apparent reason, and are prone to suffer calcium deficiencies. In addition, females do not breed consistently, so a score of 4 here. Garaging. They can be kept in a simple enclosure, but it should be at least 3 foot wide for adults, a score of 6 here. Fuel. Juveniles require live food, but some adults can be conditioned to take pellets and frozen crickets, a score of 5. Being a common and familiar lizard to many Australians, the eastern beardie does not pack a high wow factor, so a score of 3, giving a total score of 33. For the central or inland bearded dragon, on price, at $50 to $100, this is also a very affordable pet, a score of 9. Central bearded dragons are prolific and frequently bred, so on availability I gave them a score of 8. Central beardies are the easiest dragon species to maintain. If you follow a few simple rules, you can expect them to live over 10 years in captivity, a score of 7. On garaging, I scored them with a 6 because adults require at least a 3-foot enclosure to be happy. Fuel. Hatchlings require live food, but can be weaned onto frozen crickets and pellets by the age of 6 months. However, providing a fresh supply of veggies does require some time and effort, a score of 6. Some of the yellow and red morphs being developed are impressive, so a wow factor score of 5, giving an overall score of 41. For the pygmy or black soil dragon, also very affordable at between $50 and $100 each, depending on size, so a score of 9 on price. Pygmy bearded dragons are almost as commonly kept as centrals, so a score of 7 for availability. Pygmy dragons are as easy as central dragons to maintain, so a score of 7. On garaging, I scored them with a 7, which is slightly above centrals, as their smaller size means you can get away with a smaller cage. On fuel, hatchling pygmies are smaller than the other two, but with appropriate sized baby crickets, they will grow fast and can be weaned onto frozen crickets and pellets. Almost as easy as the central beady, and doesn't require as many veggies, a score of 5 for fuel. Wow factor. Exciting new morphs such as the hypermelanistic specimen featured in this episode have promised to produce some interesting colours, so a score of 4 here, giving a total score of 39.